In a world with artificial intelligence, how do we transform education? Thanks for tuning in. I'm Daniel Lopez, and this is the AI Education Conversation, where we explore the opportunities, risks, and impacts of AI across education. If you'd like to join the conversation, check out the AIeducationconversation.com. Let's jump in. Hello, everyone. The last couple of weeks have been a whirlwind for me as I work to close out this school year with our school districts and partners. I know this is the case for many of you out there as well. I've been reflecting on today's conversation for a while now, and I'm excited to finally share it with you. In today's episode, I talk with Coach Karle Delo. Coach Karle is a lifelong educator and has held roles as Director of Curriculum Instruction and TIC Integration for a public school district in Michigan. Karle and I talk about the double-edged sword of AI in education. Karle shares what the impact of AI has been in her school community, strategies for AI adoption, AI student usage, AI scams and deepfakes, AI detection, the role of AI education products, and much more. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Coach Karle and give her a follow on LinkedIn after listening to our conversation. If you are interested in my takeaways, sign up for the conversation at the AIeducationconversation.com. I share all show notes with my community 12 hours before sharing with my social media networks. If you want to continue supporting the podcast, rating, a review, share on social media, or recommendation to a colleague go a long way in helping to amplify our space and host bigger conversations. Finally, if you're a school, district, organization ready to explore AI and make a change, I am available for workshops and consulting at the AIeducationconversation.com. Humans at the heart of education. Enjoy the episode. Karle Delo, welcome to the AI Education Conversation. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
Yes. And just as I was mentioning to you, I've been very interested in your background, and I know that you've been all over the place in terms of offering some presentations around AI and education. So just before we really jump into that, can you share a little bit about your background in education and your professional journey?
So, like many educators, I knew pretty early on that I wanted to go into teaching because I had an excellent second grade teacher myself. And I was a quirky kid to say the least, but she was the funny teacher, the cool teacher, and she used that status to make my weird seem cool. And I will be forever grateful for that. And I remember thinking, if I can do that for one other person, then it will all have been worth it and my life would have purpose and meaning. So I knew really early on that was the path that I wanted to take. So once my first teaching job was teaching second grade, which was a little younger than I was hoping for, but I was excited about it. Then 3 weeks into the school year, my district was making some changes, some budget cuts, and they called me. Fortunately, I wasn't laid off, but they gave me about a 3 days notice to tell me that I was going to be moved to teaching middle school science. So that was a big change for me, but I ended up sticking with it and doing it for over 10 years. And middle school is such an awkward age for a lot of kids. So I really saw the need to be the champion for kids and be the adult in their corner in many cases. And teaching science is something I'm really passionate about too, because it's almost like being able to show the secret behind the magic trick when you're showing kids how things actually work. And when you get to see that light bulb go off, it's a pretty cool moment. So, somewhere in there in that 10 years of teaching, I got my master's in ed tech. I've also been really drawn towards technology from a young age as well. I mean, I grew up in the 90s. I don't know about you, but at that time, I
Same.
was grasping onto, yeah, okay. I was grasping onto any piece of new technology that I could. Like my dad came home with this new thing called a digital camera from work. And it was, I mean, I've seen like mini microwaves that are smaller than this digital camera, and you had to shove an entire floppy disk into the side to save a photo. And like even stuff like that, I was fascinated by and using every chance I could get. And once I got that ed tech degree, I was really eager to jump into a instructional coach or a tech coach type of role, but it just wasn't in the cards at the district that I was at. I work in a really small rural district, like literally in the middle of a cornfield in mid-Michigan. And so they didn't have that role. And I'm grateful for it now looking back because I did get that full 10 years of experience in the classroom. And I think I needed that to really understand how to be an effective teacher for me. And finally, it was 2020, we got this big grant and a instructional coaching role for technology came through. And it was literally the week of the COVID shutdown that I interviewed for that job. So March of 2020, I got the role, and that was kind of a crash course in instructional coaching and being a tech coach because everybody was just, what are we doing? How are we supposed to do this? And I did that coaching role for 3 years. It shifted to more of an instructional coach than just the technology focus, which that really aligns with my philosophy on ed tech. I think that in ed tech, a lot of times we focus on all these cool tech tools, but there's really no magic tool that's going to solve all the problems in education. It's about good teaching at the core of things. And the title of just instructional coach, instead of having the tech piece added to it, allowed me to really focus on teaching quality teaching strategies. And then how can we bring tech into that when it's appropriate? So I did that again for 3 years. And then this is my first year as an administrator. And so the director of curriculum and instruction for my district. And that's been a whole different world, and I never necessarily saw myself in that role previously, but it's nice to have a seat at the table, and what I really wanna do is set teachers up for success so that then students can be set up for success as well.
Wow, that's interesting. I mean, I'm hearing such a theme here of like almost being forged by fire in some of your roles here and jumping into new roles at a moment where like beyond basic level proficiency is required from the individuals in those roles from being a tech person or like a tech integration person during the pandemic and now even being a DCI person during a moment where there's such a need for a revamped curriculum and there's all these questions about artificial intelligence and how it makes pretty much every assignment obsolete. And I'm sure that there's some folks in your ear who've shared some grievances on those or things that you've heard there. So, I mean, I'd love to go there and understand how you're experiencing it now as in this curriculum and instruction role. But maybe before we get too far into that, what was your first experience with AI? Was it through this role? Was it in a different fashion?
So at the time, so I'm going back like November, December of 2022, and I was still in the instructional coaching role at that time, and the first time I heard about ChatGPT was actually on Facebook. A friend of mine mentioned these new AI tools that could write essays, and she was a language arts teacher, so I'm like, "That sounds interesting." And as someone who's always been drawn towards tech, of course, I had to check it out, and I was blown away. I was using it for personal reasons, so I was trying it to see what I could do with travel planning, meal planning, and also, of course, how could this be used with education as well? How can this be used by teachers? And I felt like the possibilities were endless. So I was definitely a big time enthusiast at the beginning. And then in March of 23 was when I feel like all of these tools for teachers started coming out, right? And the first person who I heard use this term, Sophie Theodoro, she calls them ChatGPT wrappers. So it's using the same API as ChatGPT and these other tools, but it's all these tools that are specifically made for teachers. So those started coming out, and I just felt like I needed to share all of those with even a more broad audience than at my district. So that's when I hopped on TikTok and started making some videos to help share the power of these tools with other people. So I was definitely a big time enthusiast at that point. Um, Bringing it back to my shift to the role of curriculum director at my district, I felt that I needed to really listen to everybody's perspective when it came to AI because we had the enthusiasts and we have the skeptics. And it's any leader's responsibility to listen to all perspectives and come up with an approach that's right for the collective group. So that is really how my experience has shifted. And I do think part of it is because of that role, because I'm in this administrative role. And so I've listened to both sides and I feel like I land somewhere in the middle. And I think that I firmly do believe that all of us is smarter than any one of us, and so that has been at the core of our approach as far as how we're going to approach this is listening to the skeptics and the enthusiasts, because so often the reality is somewhere in between and there's good points on both sides. So that's where I started and where I am now.
Yeah, that's quite the journey, and I think it's in some ways my learning journey doing this podcast, I've landed somewhere similarly, which is I think there's definitely good points being made on both sides, right? As to why we do need to maybe push further in the opportunity ahead, but also there are some things that are very problematic or can be very concerning, some red flags, if you will, around artificial intelligence. And then to your point, it then becomes a lot more personal when you're these are your friends, your colleagues in the building, right, who are sharing their feelings with you and trying to contextualize their experience, or maybe not even their experience, but the way they're being impacted by artificial intelligence, or somewhere in between, whether they're using it or being impacted by it. And it's definitely, I can imagine, very difficult. I'm wondering, knowing that you've landed in this kind of philosophical perspective, like what has that meant for the way that you are shifting or not shifting your behaviors in your role? Like, are you prioritizing drafting specific things? How is that evolving? Like what you're actually working on and what you feel like you need to be doing right now to meet the needs of your school community?
Yeah, well, first I'll say that one thing I do appreciate about your podcast is that you interview those multiple perspectives. And so I've recently listened to Fonz Mendoza, that interview, which I would say he is, I think, self-proclaimed a cautious advocate. And then also Winston Roberts, you had him on recently.
Mhm.
He's much
Mhm.
more of an enthusiast. And I found so many valid points from both of those interviews. So I really appreciate about this podcast, and I encourage people to go listen to those and other previous episodes as well. But when I think about our approach at our district, we're very much so somewhere in the middle, which I think is what's right for our district. Every district is
Mhm.
unique and different, and every district's going to have that different approach. But I think for many, somewhere in the middle is the right move. We are moving forward, and some of the things we're doing. So the first year. So I remember in the spring of 2023, we did talk about it in professional learning at our district. And the goal was we hope that you would start to explore these tools at the end of the school year here and throughout the summer. And the the goal there, and then that continued throughout the rest of this past school year. So the 2023-2024 school year, our approach was we wanted teachers to explore these tools and figure out what they can do, what they can't do, what are their limitations. Because if teachers are coming from a place of knowledge and experience, then we're going to be so much more prepared to actually talk about student use. And that was the approach too, is whether you love or hate AI, it's going to be in your classroom at some point. And so if you can approach that from an informed place, you're going to have a much easier time having that conversation with students. So that's been our approach this year. But then at the same time, um, thinking ahead, we have always said, like right now, it's about exploration. We are going to talk about AI resistant assignments and how to do that. But in the future, we're going to be talking about AI friendly assignments, and we're going to be talking about how students can use AI and how we can empower students to use AI to enhance their experience. So that's always kind of been in the background as a common understanding of this is coming. And what we're doing now is very controlled pilots with where students are actually trying out AI. So as a district, we're piloting Fobiz, which is a German company. And because they're based in Germany, their data privacy restrictions are a lot more strict than they are here in the US. So there's a lot of baked in features that really appealed to us as a district as far as data privacy and student safety. So right now we're doing very controlled piloted groups with our students where there is a instructional coach who is also very well versed in AI. It's not myself, it's an additional instructional coach we have in our district. And so she will work with the teacher and they'll come up with a plan of how to roll this out. And then while the students are using it, oftentimes she's actually in the room going around and asking students for feedback, trying to figure out what are the problem areas, what things are coming up, so that then we can make changes and shift things so that the next time the when we do actually roll out student use more across the district, that we're really prepared for that. And so I'm very excited. We're starting an AI advisory team on Monday of next week as our first meeting. And some of our goals are to create a draft of guidelines for use for students and for teachers and all staff, really. And then also, have you seen the AI assessment scales that are out there? Kind of the like almost like
Yeah.
red, yellow, green? Yeah.
Totally, I have. I've seen, interestingly enough, I mean, I just had a conversation with Vera Cubero out of North Carolina, who's done a lot of work with those, and I know Dr. Leon Furze, a lot of the rubrics he's created has have seemed to be adopted by a lot of practitioners here in the States. I've noticed that.
That's really cool because I shared that the version that Vera has been working on with the AI advisory team and told them to look at it in advance. And she was actually editing the document while we were kind of all looking at it. So that's really cool. And LinkedIn has been such an amazing place to make these connections and find some of these resources that are out there. So we are going to look through those drafts. And for listeners who are less familiar with that AI assessment scale, like, think about a stoplight, red, yellow, green, and it's all about clear expectations for students. So when a teacher gives an assignment, red would be no AI should be used at all, yellow would be some, green would be go for it. You can use AI alongside your own thinking and your own process. And then in addition to that, thinking about how should we be transparent about AI use? And especially like when students use AI, what are the expectations for transparency there? So, for example, let's say there is a yellow level assignment, a mid-level type of assignment where some AI can be used. Maybe students will turn in the actual chat that they had with the large language model or with AI, or they might just cite it and show what prompt did they use to help them with their work. So what I'm really hoping is that we have that draft of those two things ready. And then next year we can start thinking about lesson plans for student use to inform students about what are the limitations, how does it actually work? Because those are some conversations I've had with kids. It's like, do you know how this actually works? And they're like, no. And so I think it's important to tell them it's not actually thinking, it's a predictive model. And all models are wrong, some models are useful, right? And that's the same goes for these large language models. So I want students to be using it from an informed place. And so now we're starting next year, we'll be thinking about before we roll out these AI assessment scales and have students using AI, how are we going to inform them about what it really is and what cautions need to be in place?
Yeah, it's so fascinating to hear about the multiple layers you all are going through, and I think based on the things that I've learned and some of the people who seem to be far ahead, it seems like those are some great tactics to jump in with. I'm curious to go back to just for a second to the student pilot you'd mentioned leveraging Phobis. Is that something I think I might have missed when you said that. Is that something that is like actively underway or has already taken place or something you all are planning for?
So we have a open pilot with Phobis, and what they have, so they're the number one PD providers in Germany. So there's all these courses that teachers can take, and a lot of them are free. So you could go on there as a teacher and go through a course, and there's recorded webinars. Eric Kurtz is a big name in the world of AI and education and ed tech. He's got a webinar on there you can view for free. I'm actually working on a course for them right now. So there's that component to it. But then there's also AI tools for teachers. So you can access a chat bot. They have a prompt lab with these pre made kind of prompting tools like real world connections or multiple choice assessment generator or whatever. And then on top of that, another layer is they have something called shared spaces. And that's where you get to create an assignment for your students to do in a controlled setting where you can go in and you can go back and look at the conversation that students had with the chatbot. And there's, I think, six different options at this point. Like, you could give them access to an image generator, you can give them access to a chatbot, You can give them access to like an editor type of tool, and I'd have to pull it up to know exactly what the other ones are, but it does allow them to interact with the API of ChatGPT or Claude. You can actually choose which API within Phobos that you want to interact with, but it's in a more controlled setting, and there's a lot of layers, a lot of filters in between that do protect student data and also the results that you get.
So just to clarify, you were saying that you all are engaging in a pilot right now where your students are getting an opportunity to use like some of those Phobis shared spaces?
Yes, and we're doing those in, like, those small controlled groups where there's usually an instructional
Yeah.
coach also circulating. So, yeah, we are trying that out in small groups, yeah.
Yeah, I was just no, that's helpful to know. I just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly because I think my question is like, what's the reaction been? Like, how are students experiencing those groups? What's some of the feedback been in that experience? Are you hearing positive, negative, neutral? Like, what's coming up there?
Students are reacting positively, and myself and the teachers notice an increase in student engagement across the board. And so, one of my favorite questions to ask teachers after the fact is, what was beneficial for you as the teacher, and what did you see as the most beneficial component for students? And the answer is usually the same. And it's that students are in the driver's seat. They are driving their own learning, and it's at a much deeper level than they could have done previously. So, just for example, one teacher in our high school just finished reading the book Animal Farm, and he had students interview, ask AI these questions, but to answer as if it was a character from Animal Farm. And there was a prompt that he had students copy and paste and kind of fill in the blanks and modify. And what he said is previously that would have had to been a teacher guided situation. And now it's students in the driver's seat interacting with AI acting as one of those characters. And just there was a deeper level engagement and there was a deeper level of thinking from the students. So that I think seems to be the common thread. And then also, I'm one thing I'm really passionate about is creativity. And I think we need to have more opportunities for creativity in our schools because it is one of the top skills needed in the workplace today. If you look at like the Manpower Group always puts out a report of the talent shortage and what are the skills that students or what are the skills that are needed in the workplace right now that don't exist. And things like creativity are usually at the top of that list. And so just the other day, I was working with students who their assignment was actually they have to create and deliver a lesson plan to the rest of their class. It's a leadership elective course, and so they were actually using AI to help them develop the lesson. So that was a really cool experience because then they're seeing how teachers could use it in a way that's not only going to save teachers time, but is really impactful for students. And this kid was like, "Hey, look at this. I just had ChatGPT or this tool, this Phobis tool, create a rap about respect as if it was Muhammad Ali." And we looked through it and it was so cool. And I asked the student, I'm like, "What do you think of this?" And he's like, "I think this is pretty good." And so just empowering students to think creatively, I think that's another huge potential of AI in education.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate just hearing you reflect that back because I know that right now there's a lot of schools that are hesitant to try experimenting with like their students actually using AI tools, right? I think we're at a point where I think the landscape right now for the most part is like receptive to the idea of adults using tools. But I think that like student line, even for the older students, is where a lot of folks are still on a slippery slope. So it's helpful to have data, even just hearing how your students are receiving. From my perspective, I think being able to use AI tools, I think will likely increase engagement and just make school fun, right?
Mhm,
Which I think is the goal. Because if school's fun, they're going to want to learn, right?
mhm,
And it's going to be about the work versus trying to find a way to shortcut the work, right? Most of the time, I think when students or adults shortcut the work, it's because it's not fun or it's not engaging or it doesn't feel relevant, right? And so I think it's just helpful to hear that. I wanted to circle back to something else that I'm thinking about, which is given that you are entering this experience and you are a tremendous support for your school community around AI, right? You are engaging it and providing it in a way that some school districts don't have. Would you say that across the board, you think now that there's maybe like a basic or a proficient level of understanding from most of the adults in your school community about at least like what AI is, whether or not they choose to like really deeply use it? I'm just curious, like, what's the baseline now?
We're getting there. And so if you look at surveys nationally about teachers and how they feel about AI and how often they use it, there's still a huge chunk of teachers who will say, I've never used it and I don't plan to. And I think a huge reason for that is this misconception that using AI is cheating and somehow cheating the system. And we actually see that from students as well. So we when we talk to students about AI, that tends to be a common response is, "Oh, well that's cheating." And going back to that AI assessment scale, when you think about the different ways and different levels in which you can use AI, I truly believe the most powerful way to use artificial intelligence and these generative AI tools is in a way where you are taking your pre-existing thoughts and enhancing them, or you're using AI as a brainstorming buddy. I use AI almost every single day. And if you think about that red, yellow, green model, it's almost always in the yellow. So I use it so often to either help me brainstorm or to add to what I've already created. And I truly do think that is the most powerful way to use AI because if you just ask AI to generate something for you and you have a very limited input that you put in, I it's not a great output, right? It's very generic but with a lot of words. But if you actually input a thought that you have, then what it can give you back is so much more. And so that's what I really want to show adults and students. So there's this quote from Holly Clark, who's another big name in AI and education. This was actually a quote of one of her students because she was working with students and using AI. And one of her students said, AI is not thinking for me, it's making me a better thinker. And I think that's how we should strive to use AI as adults. And also, that's how we should show students how to use it as this co pilot. So, when it comes
Mm.
to perception and teacher use of AI, we're getting there. I think we're definitely higher than the national average as far as using it, but we're doing it, I think, in the right type of ways. The most success I've found is instead of just having like an AI PD day, like we're just going to talk about AI today, which we've done some things like that. But I think the most powerful way to show teachers how to use it is with a pre existing type of initiative. So, for example, at our middle school, we're working on curriculum work. And specifically last year, we changed up electives and teachers got the opportunity to create new electives. And we showed them some prompts they could use to help them brainstorm outlines for their electives, catchy creative titles that middle schoolers would be interested in. And because we introduced it in that way, that group has really kind of taken it and ran with it in a different way than other groups because we showed them how it can fit into what they're already doing and enhance what they're already doing. So I think that's a key component. There are definitely still people who see it as something that is cheating or maybe not for them. And so that's, I feel like that's always, whenever you introduce something new, that's gonna be the reaction. You're gonna have change equals fear equals resistance. So that's always gonna be part of the process. But I do think the approach and the way we approach AI with educators is gonna have a big impact on how it's received.
Yeah, I mean, to that last point, I mean, if you have any experience implementing new initiatives in a school-based community, you're always gonna have your champions, and then you're gonna have folks who were highly resistant to that change. It happens, but it's interesting to just hear how you all are grappling with AI in the headspace you're in now versus a school-based community where they still are highly working off of the mainstream media conceptions about AI or like what their colleagues are saying versus a firsthand experience of what AI is based on how they were receiving it. I know that you have presented quite a bit on AI in education and in various places. One topic that stood out to me is you were talking a little bit about AI FOMO, right? And I
Mhm.
think many of us know FOMO, fear of missing out, right? This common, I think, emotion that can happen in different contexts. But you talked about AI FOMO. What does that mean? And how do folks get unstuck from that?
Yeah, I experienced this myself because like I said at the beginning, I was just like fascinated and I wanted to learn about all the tools. And at one point, I kind of shut down. It was actually this past year because I was just like overwhelmed and there's a new AI tool coming out every single day and I don't know all of them. And I felt like as a leader in this space, I was supposed to. And then I went back to think about your core beliefs when it comes to ed tech, and that is that what is most important are the education strategies, the strategies that people are using. What comes second is what tools that they're using. There's no magic wand, there's no magic tool that's going to just fix all your problems. So I really went back to that and focused on what are the core strategies. And so when it comes to thinking about all the different tools that are out there, another thing is I am a tech enthusiast by nature. That's just how I run. And think about the people out there who provide professional learning on technology. They are also probably ed tech enthusiasts, right? And so what we one thing we tend to do is be like, here's 20 tools. Here's and think about all the lists you've seen that like 50 tools for AI that teachers need to know about. Teachers don't need to know about 50 tools. They don't need to know about 20 tools because the average educator is not an AI or tech enthusiast. So I think that we need to keep that in mind as people who present professional learning on the topic. Don't overwhelm teachers with tools because that is going to turn off a number of people. I think that what's key is to really, I think every teacher should have 3 different types of tools in their toolbox at minimum, and then up to, depending on your level of enthusiasm, you might have 20, you might have 10. But I do think that every teacher should know how to use large language models and have one at least large language model they can fall back on, whether that's Google Gemini, ChatGPT, Copilot, Claude, and they should know the basics of how to prompt that large language model. Myself, I have 2 or 3 that I like to go to, but at least 1. And then there's also those teacher specific AI tools, those ChatGPT wrappers like Eduaid and Magic School. And I think that teachers should have one of those at their disposal as well. And the difference, sometimes I get the question of, well, why why do I need to know how to prompt if there's all these tools out there that are easier to use and don't necessarily require the knowledge of prompting? And the analogy I like to use is it's like being able to cook for yourself versus going out to eat. And when you are using a large language model and you're writing your own prompt, it's like being able to cook for yourself. You're going to get exactly what you want out of it. And if you don't the first time, you can tweak it, you can change it to make it your own. And that's an important skill for educators. However, like thinking about going back to that cooking analogy, even though I think I'm a pretty good cook, I still go out to eat sometimes because I might just not feel like cooking that day, or I might be able to go out to a restaurant and get something better than I could make myself. And that's where those AI tools that are made specifically for teachers come in. Sometimes it does save a lot of time to be able to go to Eduate and just click a button, type in your grade level and topic, and then it gives you a great output. So, those are 2 things I think every teacher should at least have one of, 2 or 3 depending on your level of enthusiasm. And then the final component is some sort of student facing tool. I love CuriePod, I think is a great starting point for students interacting with AI somewhat. Students are very engaged by the tool. But then there's other tools like Phobis has the shared spaces AI tool. There's Magic Student from Magic School. There's School AI. So there's a ton of those to choose from as well. But as PD providers, a way to prevent that AI FOMO is again focusing first on the strategies. And what I found is the majority of people can figure out how to use almost any tool by clicking around for 5 to 10 minutes. There's still some direct instruction that needs to take place, but I'm not a fan of PD sessions that focus on how to use one specific tool. I think that oftentimes that's missing the point. And then, especially if it's like about 20 tools, that's just going to lead to a feeling of overwhelm.
I think hearing your how you have set your table is very interesting because I think even in my own learning, I've been thinking quite a bit about where I right size very hyper specific education AI tools into the equation. I don't know that I have like a very clear vision yet, but I think what you've shared is like really pushing my thinking there about how I consider those tools. Because I think to your earlier point, I think I've been a really strong proponent of using like the more mainstream large language models just because, and my perspective is similar to like what you shared, which is like it'll teach you like computational thinking. That's like a muscle you're really going to start to use more because you do have to use the prompting. And I think being able to think in that way is likely going to be very helpful for a lot of like what you do. And then the second is just those are going to likely be the tools that have the technological advancements more quickly, right? When you think of the resources, the financial and technological resources of an open AI or a Google, right? Compared to like a chat GP or an AI wrapper, as you referred to that there, it's like they're going to have the advantage, I think, of being able to select which models they want strategically when they want to. But then, like OpenAI, obviously, they can deploy a model whenever they'd like to that can be better, right? So those are, I think, some of the trade offs either which way. But I think hearing how you are just setting your table is very interesting. When you, I know that you've presented on some other topics, and one topic that stood out to me, maybe it's even in alignment to something you said earlier of like how you balance yourself. But I know you presented on this topic of like the double edged sword of artificial intelligence. What do you mean by that? What's the double edged sword?
So, like any tool, AI can be used in ways that are helpful, in ways that are harmful. And so, the most simple analogy I have is think about a hammer. It can be used to build and construct and create, but it also can be used to destroy, destruct, and break things, depending on the intent. And when you look back through almost any human innovation, you see this duality. And so I just think that's really important to address. And I'll tell you the moment that I decided, like that title, that session title came from a specific moment when I was delivering professional development. And I was talking to some teachers. It was outside of my district. We did a 2-hour session on AI. And I did focus a lot on different tools. We did talk about ways that it could be helpful and harmful, but it wasn't necessarily the center of my message, right? And we got to the end of the session. I think I showed a specific tool, an email communication tool. So how you can take maybe a parent email that you don't know how to respond to and put it through this tool and it'll give you a great response. And I heard a teacher, and again, this is not at our district, but the teacher said, "Wow, this is amazing. It's like I don't even have to think anymore." And I was crushed. I'm like, "No, like that is not at all what I was trying to get across here." And going back to that quote from the student Holly Clark was working with, AI is not thinking for me, it's making me a better thinker. I'm like, I need to make that more of a central part of the message. I need to talk about the duality. We need to talk about the worries that are coming from the skeptics because they have a point. And so I really shifted my approach after that PD session. I came up with the double edged sword idea and presented that at a Michigan conference, ed tech conference called McCall. And that was a great conference. But I will say a lot of the sessions were focused on 2020 AI tools. It was all the hype. You have an episode also that was that on this show called Beyond the Hype of AI or something to that nature. And I think we have to get beyond the hype if we're going to really do what's best for teachers and for students. And so there were very few sessions at that conference that were critical at all of AI. And I think it's important to have an approach where you do address those things. And also, I'll share that the next PD session that I gave to a group of, it was mostly high school teachers, I started out by showing some of the really cool things AI could do, but I also showed some of the ways that AI can be harmful. And I addressed that skepticism immediately and got so much more buy-in from that group of teachers because they saw like, oh, there's some honesty here and we're being heard and validated because again, there are some really important points from the skeptics as well. So I just think that that's an important thing to address. I personally was impacted by an AI scam, like almost. Like, so I got a message from someone on LinkedIn who was they said they were doing their dissertation on AI in education. They wanted to talk. Their profile seemed legit. I got on a video call with them and it seemed fishy from the get go. And I am about 99% sure that it was an AI bot that I was actually chatting with on this video call because there was their camera. Yeah, their
Wow.
camera was not on. And at first it was kind of hard to tell. Like the voice seemed a little robotic, but I wasn't certain, so I didn't wanna make assumptions, but then when I heard have you ever been on a phone call with clearly a bot and you hear, like, typing in the background as they're talking?
Yeah,
I
totally.
started to hear that and I'm like, "This is 100% an AI call, video call," and it was terrifying because here I've got my camera on, I've got my microphone on, I'm giving this AI bot my voice and my image, and that was really scary, and
Yeah.
personalized learning is a huge benefit potentially of AI, but the fact that AI can tell exactly what a student's strengths and weaknesses are and what their likes and dislikes are, that is both exciting and terrifying. And so we just need to approach it with caution and most so I'm making a generalization here and an assumption, but in my experience, most educators think ChatGPT is a relatively safe tool. And it's not. Like, we need to be careful about not inputting personally identifiable information into that. And that needs to be at the forefront of conversations that we have with educators, but also with students. So,
Wow. Well, I'm very happy that you didn't continue to go down that spider web, virtual AI spider web there. That's very scary, and I know that unfortunately I've heard similar tales in different fashions. I mean, I'm sure you've heard some of these as well around like even the voice recorded calls, right? Because it's so easy now to get somebody's voice, train an AI bot on that for very cheaply. I mean, folks may have also have heard of even some of the election implications. There was a scandal that happened in New Hampshire where essentially we're talking about how a computer developer down in I think it was Florida somewhere was paid like $500 to train like and develop a robocall that was deployed in New Hampshire and had Joe Biden's voice and was saying specific things. So and that's only going to increase. Like let's just call it for what it is. And to your earlier point, if we are hesitant to have conversations about some of the trade-offs here, we are going to have a repeat of social
mhm,
media, right? Where yeah, social media is great. I think there's some cool things about it, but also you could argue, and there's been a lot of experts who've studied this, that we're one of the most depressed generations of people, especially our young people that have ever walked this planet. And it's because they feel isolated. They're always comparing themselves to each other. They only think everybody else around them is successful and winning and their life is awful. Right. And so there's all of these things that are impacting our young people, impacting our young adults, impacting our society. And because we weren't educated around these tools as they were coming out, right? There wasn't this idea of like, hey, if you spend 4 hours on your phone or on TikTok, that's really bad. You should go outside. You should get some
yeah,
sun, right? And just like having those types of conversations for a long period of time, that now is leading to us having societal impacts of a mass deployment of technology. And to your point, I think if we are reluctant to say the things as it relates to AI, likely we will be doomed to repeat a similar trajectory with different effects and different impacts. And that feels very scary as well. I think to your other point, the challenge with us, especially in education, like going to a lot of these conferences and it all being about tools is then now something that is a general purpose technology and artificial intelligence starts to become ed techified, which I think I have a lot of caution about because I would say, unlike you, I did not enter this space as somebody who was really enthusiastic with tech. I've actually been highly skeptical about tech throughout most of my career. And the reason why is simple. It's because I've been in instances where I was a teacher and a counselor and I was burned by technology. Technology did not make my life easier. It actually made it much more difficult. So you can imagine I've taken a really
yeah,
stark 180 there because I believe in the potential of artificial intelligence as a general purpose technology so much. I think generative AI is great. But I also think one concern I have is to your point is that there's going to be all of these, a proliferation of all of these new companies. And then people then look at one company or one product, and then they think that's artificial intelligence, that their whole conception of what that is that one thing. And it's not that, right? AI is electricity. AI is going to power a bunch of new things, right? It's not just going to power this little lesson plan generator or this little learning management system. It's going to empower a lot of things. And I think the only way that we as a society are going to wrap our heads around that is through literacy, through having these conversations, the good and the bad, right? And saying the things. And so that resonates so much. And have you, as you all have been thinking about some of the student or the teacher facing conversations, is that something that you have like broached at all with your staff beyond going to the double edged sword? Are you having conversations around deep fakes or things like that? Has that been coming up in
Yeah,
dialogue at all?
that's actually how I usually like to put that type of information towards the beginning of the conversation. And what I've noticed is that even with a group where they're highly skeptical at the beginning, when you show things like that, but then you also show the positive things that can happen, what I've noticed is that teachers are more likely to say, we need to talk to the kids about this when you show the harmful impacts as well. Because then they realize, like, holy smokes, I'm learning so much about this right now. I had no idea. And so we need to talk to the kids about this. And they come to that conclusion on their own when you present both a balanced approach, when you talk about the ways it can be helpful and the ways it can be harmful. So yeah, we are definitely having those conversations, and I think that's an important part of the AI literacy piece of how are we going to educate students about this as well so that they can make informed decisions and so that they know that AI is not right 100% of the time and also some of the ways it can be used that are really harmful. So I really like the curriculum and the lesson plans from AI for Education from Amanda Bickerstaff's the CEO of that company, and there are some amazing lessons there, and so I think that's where we're gonna start looking next year as far as what kind of curriculum do we wanna roll out to talk to students about it.
It's good to see that they're having those conversations because I think foundationally, that's what needs to be true. I think ultimately, what tools and products school districts choose to use, there's space for that. And I think, of course, that's like an important piece of the equation too, and figuring out how that aligns with school-based values and things like that. But foundationally, you have to start there, or you have to start with really understanding like what is your end goal, to what extent you believe AI tools can or cannot support the vision that you were trying to manifest, and then working there. I mean, I think even I'm still grappling with some of the earlier things you had talked about, even this idea of what tools you set on your table as you think about what teachers need. And I don't know that I have a strong opinion on that just at this particular point. I mean, me personally, ChatGPT has been the tool that has just been more seamless. Like I feel like we're tight at this point and I've used that a lot. But I've also found myself using Canva quite a bit. Some of the AI powered features they have there for different reasons. I think foundationally, what I know though is that to answer that question, you have to hold space to reflect. You have to hold space to ask yourself, what do I actually have to do in my job? What do I like to do? What is like really boring and I don't like to do? And then as you start answering those questions, you then can think about what are some of the right tools that might fit in for some of those pieces because what works for me may not work for somebody else, right? What works for you may not work for somebody else. And I think one of the big problems that we have in education, especially in public education, is we're tasked with so much. And the impact of that is so much of the day we're just responding or engaging or presenting or doing that and we don't have time to just sit and think, right? And like look at the landscape and say, okay, let's pause for a second. What's going on? What's going well? What could be better? What can we shift, right? And make those halftime adjustments. And I think, unfortunately, because of that, in those few moments is where teachers do have that opportunity, they are so exhausted that usually that initial moment is just like trying to almost process what the series of events have been since the last time they had that. And oftentimes it's those are highly emotional, highly like venting type spaces because you almost need to go through that as a person before you can even get your headspace around reflecting or problem solving again. And so I think foundationally, what I hope this proliferation of artificial intelligence creates for schools is it really encourages them to go back to things that organizationally just make a good organization,
Mhm.
right? If you create spaces for your people to reflect and strategically plan things, you're probably going to come up with a really good vision for how AI fits into the things that you do that is successful for your schools, right? And to your earlier point, even about surveillance as well, or excuse me, personalization, but also the trade off there of like the surveillance aspect, right? Because they know so much of you. Similarly, I think if you are thinking about having places to strategically plan, you then can decide to what extent you feel comfortable having AI as a tutor type deployments, using AI for evaluation, those types of pieces as well. But those aren't easy answers. They're very difficult answers to very difficult questions. And you need time to think to foundationally be able to answer
Yeah,
any of
and I
those
think
things.
just to add on to that, I do think as a district leader, I think it is our responsibility to give teachers that space and to give them time. So often in professional development, it is information overload and there's very little time to actually like experience the tools and try them out and experiment. But then there's usually not enough time to actually reflect on that as well and have those conversations. So I think anyone who provides professional learning opportunities on AI need to think about how they can build that in. And that means less exposure to information and like less exposure to specific tools. But I do think that it's going to have a lasting impact. And we've tried to really, instead of just doing like, I was very tempted at the beginning of this school year. We have one back to school professional learning day, like, right before the students come in, and I was very tempted to say, "It's gonna be AI." Like, of course, we're gonna talk about AI all day, but we already had
That FOMO
it
was
was,
creeping in,
yeah,
huh?
but we already had a plan of what our professional learning would look like. We already had our district initiatives in place, and so what we decided to do instead is let's see if we can infuse AI into those existing initiatives and show teachers how here's our initiative, here's what we're doing today. But also, if you're curious, here's a way you could use AI to enhance this process. And then, in addition to that, throughout the year, especially at our secondary level, we're taking it more slow at the elementary because there's we're actually adopting a new reading curriculum at our elementaries, and that's going to take priority right now. But we are already prepared to show teachers how we can use AI to enhance that process and how to save them time there. But with our secondary teachers, especially, we made an intentional point to build it into short little PD sessions and staff meetings to offer coaching sessions on it one on one. So it wasn't an all one sit and get and then forget about it type of thing. It was constant throughout the year. And we've had this kind of vision moving forward of how we're going to sprinkle it throughout the year and also give teachers time to reflect on it and to experiment and actually try it out themselves as well.
Yeah, that philosophy resonates so much with me because I'm a big proponent about that. I think in education we have this tendency to silo different topics, and obviously even our schedules are baked that way. We have 5 class periods or 6 class periods and everything's siloed off into different subjects. But there's a world where it doesn't exist that way, right? And we are treating projects as very complex problems and asking students to leverage a multitude of skills or a multitude of knowledge sets to be able to tackle those big questions, right? In a very interdisciplinary way. And so being able to model that for your teachers and saying, hey, actually, like, let's solve some of the complex problems in our building, whether it's how we can transform reading for our young people, how we can support our English language learners, how we can better support our sped students. And then just asking yourself to what extent is AI helpful or not helpful in this problem is something that just is throughout everything you're doing, right? Rather than some isolated 60-minute conversation you have. To be honest, I mean, you likely have to do that in the beginning just so folks have that like
Mhm.
basic knowledge get, which is obviously something you all have already done. But then once everybody has that basic understanding of what artificial intelligence is and what we're talking about, now you can do that spiraling, which is, I'm sure, an
Mhm.
exciting place to be.
Absolutely. I think too, like anytime that I'm an AI enthusiast, I try to approach it cautiously with our district. But when it comes to talking about I don't want it to just come from me. So I think an important component of our plan is to create leaders within each building, teacher leaders who also have an affinity towards AI and are interested in it. So let's provide them also with training opportunities and opportunities to learn and opportunities to lead. And then it becomes more organic because it's not just a PD session about AI, but it's also teachers saying, hey, check that at lunch saying, hey, I found this really cool tool. I think you guys might want to learn about it. So, anytime you have an opportunity to create more leaders and more advocates of responsible and ethical AI use across the district, and that it's not just coming from one person, I think that's a powerful approach as well.
So when teachers or colleagues in your school community come up to you today and they share some of their biggest questions or curiosities around AI. What else are they asking you about, or what else are they worried about?
That's a great question. I mean, I think one of the one of the comments I get a lot is, "Wouldn't it wouldn't it take less time to just do it yourself?" Like, sometimes I get that when I'm working with AI, as a brainstorming buddy, sometimes I get that question of, "Wouldn't it be easier to just do it yourself?" And I think that sometimes, yeah, probably, but also there needs to be this level of experimentation in actually trying it out in order to for you to figure out where that line is, and when it is time to be like, "I'm just gonna do this myself," or, "I'm gonna use AI to help me." So that's a common question that I get. And then the common fears are things like, what about when students are going to use it to cheat? That's something that constantly comes up. And we've actually been really honest. I do think that once we expose students to artificial intelligence and give them information about it, I do think we might see an uptick in students misusing AI at the beginning. And we've been honest about that. And I think that honesty goes a long way. Instead of saying, no, what do you mean? Students aren't going to cheat with AI. If we show them how to use it right, they'll never do that. Instead, let's be honest and say that might happen, but we also want to have a plan. So, one thing our district is working on is coming up with an AI misuse flowchart. So, what are the steps that you should take if you suspect a student has misused AI so that we can all be on the same page with that? Because just putting it through an AI detection tool is not necessarily the right answer. So those are some of the common questions I get as well. And then things I hear online, just as being someone who does post content on TikTok and on Instagram, another common thing, a common fear is that AI is going to replace teachers. And I have strong feelings about that. I think that what what teaching is so much more complicated than just saying, here's this knowledge, now you have it. Like teachers don't just, it's not that simple. Teachers don't just distribute knowledge. Teachers guide the social process of learning. It's a social process, and the teacher plays an integral part. And in those examples that I explained earlier, where students are oftentimes driving their own learning, that's great, but the teacher's still really facilitating that process. So I still think there's a key role for that human impact and keeping humans in the loop. And I encourage people to, when you think about your favorite class that you've ever taken, what was your favorite part? It was probably your teacher, and it wasn't just the content. And when I think back to the reason why I went into education, my teacher, Miss Forback, I can only imagine what she would have done with AI. She was such an engaging and creative teacher, but when I think about it could have just been enhanced so much more with the power of artificial intelligence, but she was the reason why I liked that class. So I do strongly believe that keeping humans in the loop and that human component of education is really important and vital.
Yeah, I mean, to that last point, my favorite joke is when people do talk about AI replacing teachers. I'm like, well, to be honest, I do hope AI replaces or takes away a job from the teacher. So now instead of having that job, they'll
Mm.
still have seven more, but
Yeah.
instead of eight. I mean, but to your point, that's also what I hope it gets to, right? And I know that there's a lot of folks who've shared perspectives that have aligned very similarly to what you said. But my hope is that to a certain extent, though, sincerely, like AI does outsource or take away some of the jobs that teachers have, because then I think what is created in that space, hopefully, as you just described, is more opportunities to just build that
Mhm.
relationship with students. And it's so hard to do that in teaching in today's world, right? Is I know based on some of the teaching roles you had, I mean, when I was a 8th grade ELA teacher, I had
Mhm.
50 minutes, right, to make a connection with 30 kids. And you blink and the classroom is over. And granted, yeah, I mean, you have a lot of at bats, so there's a lot of class periods, but you then have 150 kids in total that you're serving. And it's very difficult to just like take the time and space sometimes to really just talk and get to know all of your kids, because then you also have the pressures of standardized exams or skills that you're trying to teach, or you feel just that weight of like trying to really support them in developing that content. And some of my favorite moments when I was a teacher, to your point, always go back to just the relationships I built with students. I mean, one of my favorite stories was when I used to do silent reading every day to start off my English class, just because I felt like one of the best things I could do is
Mhm.
just give them reps to just read, have a book in your hand, start to do that. And I had one student who was very reluctant to do that. And so I used to just talk to him, be like, hey, like, what do you like? What are you interested in? He's like, well, I just saw that show, The Walking Dead, and I'm interested in them. I'm like, okay, noted. So I spent some money. I ended up buying some of those Walking Dead comic books and I gave it. And then all of a sudden, complete switch. He read that comic book. He was like, can I stay after school and read this? I ended up purchasing like the whole series of books so that he could read it. And then, I mean, that he was bought into everything I did at that point. It didn't matter if it was boring or not because he knew that I saw him. And so you just, unfortunately, you don't always get the time. You don't always have those moments. Do they do that? And to be able to just have more time in a day or more space, right? Where you're having technology support you with some of the things that you were normally having to do, like I got to sit there and take attendance or I got to do this. And maybe some of those and giving you time back, you can then create some more of these like small little moments with your students, hopefully, and really build that relationship, I think, as
Mhm.
you were alluding to there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think the other piece I'm holding about what you just said is, yeah, the cheating and the AI detection piece is really tough. I recognize that a lot of teachers are still grappling with that for a multitude of things. But to your point, what a, my take on it or the way that I tend to offer some thoughts. I mean, I have a whole episode about it, so I'll save the long-winded explanation. But I would just say some of the headlines is number one, students are cheating now, even before AI, right? Like students were cheating before then. So I don't understand why we're treating it as if students were like never going to cheat or they were never prone to do that. What I tend to be more interested in is rather than trying to respond to the cheating, I tend to ask myself, like,
Mhm.
why are they cheating? Right? What is the reason? What's the motivation behind that intention? And I find that it honestly, if you really like sit there and probe, there's a handful of about 5 reasons why they may choose to cheat. Maybe like they didn't have time to do it because they had something else going on in their life. Maybe because your assignment sucked and it was boring and it wasn't fun or there wasn't learning. So they were just trying to create a shortcut to have it. Right. And there's probably a list of like 3 other things. So oftentimes I find that if you solve those problems, if you build strong relationships with your students, if you make your assignment purposeful, so it's actually something that kids want to do and it's interesting and there's enough creative choice in there to be able to do it, I'd be willing to bet your instances of cheating are going to go way down, right? And you're going to have a whole lot less students that try to get away with that because they like you or they like
And
your
one
class.
thing I try to talk about in professional learning is exactly how to do that. How can we use artificial intelligence to enhance what we're doing? So there's
Mhm.
substitution and there's transformation.
Mhm.
And I can use AI to make a really boring, busy work type of worksheet or activity for my students. I can also use AI to make a really creative assignment that students might care about. I work really closely with our 8th grade science teacher because that's the subject I used to teach. And I recently we developed together this end of unit Mario Kart physics project with the help of AI. Yeah, it's
Oh,
been like this
awesome.
brainchild of mine for a while because I'm a gamer myself. But we basically the task is to create the best, use your knowledge of physics to create the best character, cart, wheel, and glider Mario Kart combination. And I just that felt like too big of a task without AI helping give ideas. I ran it through GPT, I ran it through Gemini and asked, "What are your ideas? How could we do this?" And we that's going on right now and it's so cool to see the kids engaged in this process and they are using their knowledge of physics, but it's also really fun and engaging. So any tech tool could be used to make learning more engaging or less engaging. Again, it goes back to the strategy on how it's being used. And the last thing that we want is teachers we what we don't want to see is teachers using AI to make assignments with AI that then students are going to complete with AI and then teachers are going to grade it using AI and then it's just AI talking to itself and the whole process is
Mhm.
meaningless, right? We don't
Mhm.
want that and so that's why it's so important to approach it with the strategies first. And one thing I like to do is picture like a quadrant, like a square rectangle broken into four quadrants. And on the y axis is substitution and transformation. So, am I substituting something I've always done, like making a worksheet, or am I using AI to transform what I've always done and do something new? And then on the x axis, harmful for students or helpful for students. And then think about all these different,
Mm.
I have a flippity manipulative activity. So think about digital manipulatives. And there's 10 different examples, and teachers sort these examples of AI use into those four quadrants. That's how start almost every PD session on AI because I think that puts it at the forefront of their minds. And then that's something we always come back to and talk about because it's the intent and it's the purpose that's really important, not just the tool.
I love that. I'm a big fan of using quadrants in a lot of different capacities to differentiate or to think through things. And I love the way that you've set that up. I'm going to have to use that in my own application as well.
Absolutely.
That sounds great. Because again, to your point, I mean, it's so easy to sometimes even fall culprit to doing something that falls more into the substitution camp when there's an opportunity here to think bigger and to transform. And we all do it. If you've been in education
Mhm.
long enough, it happens. So again, no shade thrown to somebody who is using AI to create another worksheet or something. But again, you can really ask yourself, hey, by swinging at this or thinking of it,
Mhm.
like, what am I not doing? Like, what is the opportunity here I could be doing? And to your point, it's transformation. It could be a lesson that completely changes the way students think about that class with that teacher, which feels really
Yep.
exciting as well. In the spirit of that, I'd love to go down here further. I mean, I know you've shared a couple of cool projects that some of your students are working on or some of the tools you use, but maybe more broadly, as somebody who's spent a lot of time using different tools and generative AI tools, or at least research broadly in education, like what excites you about AI in
I think
education?
just first of all, seeing the excitement from teachers, AI in education, that excites me. So I think about our county level PD offerings, and our county offers high quality PD, but since they started offering sessions on AI, those PD sessions they like max out and they have to actually limit the number of people who are able to come because they run out of space. That hasn't happened for years in our county. So just the fact that it is exciting so many educators because you have a brainstorming buddy right there. You have a co-pilot and it makes it fun and exciting and it brings back some of that passion into the world of education. So that is one part of it. But then also the potential for what this can do for students and individualized and personalized learning. I think that is also there's so much potential there if it's done in the right way. So we do need to approach it with caution, but there's so much potential for students to be in that driver's seat and in control of their own learning process where teachers are facilitating. And that's been honestly since the internet has been around, the need for teachers to hold all the information, to be the holders of information and that sage on the stage that has gone down since information is readily available to all of us online. And there's still a very valid need to build background knowledge. We know that based on cognitive science, that students need background knowledge in order to think at the next level and to do critical thinking and problem solving. So that's still an important piece of it. But once they have that background knowledge, they can build even more and start to develop some of the critical thinking skills, problem solving, creativity, originality. They can do that more with them in the driver's seat than the teacher driving all of it. And teachers become more of the facilitator. And so that really excites me as well. And so to see that I also talked about earlier when we did try it out with some students, they were very engaged and excited. So that level of engagement, that's one thing that just really excites me about AI in education.
To the last point you made, I've been reflecting quite a bit on my own thoughts on like the skills that students need to have in the information age that we live in. And I recently published an episode on Dr. Ethan Mollick's Co-Intelligent book. And I think him and I share a similar alignment around a type of skill that is going to be really critical, which to your point, in society and especially in education, we place so much emphasis on creation, unique thought, creating a new thing, right? Engaging in that way. But I think what Dr. Malik describes in his book is that even when you think about innovation and what is behind that, oftentimes innovation is usually about connecting two preconceived ideas that
Mhm,
just hadn't been connected before. But foundationally, there is an element there of like building upon something else versus like starting on a blank canvas. And what I also think related to that I've been holding on to is that I don't know that we place enough emphasis, especially in this information aid,
mhm,
on curation, on somebody's ability to be able to synthesize some of the latest research happening at such a prolific rate across our society, being able to take some of the headlines, being able to draw connections between different pieces, being able to effectively analyze like macro level trends towards specific pieces based on all of these things happening. For me, that feels extremely valuable, and yet we don't seem to emphasize like those skills as much as we do like the creation element of, right? Even as we think of something like Bloom's taxonomy as an example, summarization, right, which is similar to this,
mhm,
tends to be in the middle, right? Whereas creation is near the top, right? Or is referred to like as higher level thinking. So I just find that interesting. And to your point, some of these skills now may be elevated
mhm.
or maybe deprioritized based on the new world we're in today, right? Versus what it looked like, I mean, even as early as 30 years ago in the 90s, right? And our access to information then versus
Yeah, I
what it
think
is
with
today.
the internet, it was access to information became more readily available. And so just memorizing a bunch of facts was less relevant. And now what I see AI doing is it is making certain skills less relevant, which is scary. I'm a musician and there's a tool called Suno AI that you can put. Have you checked that out yet?
I haven't. I'll tell you what, you probably already know this, but for folks who don't, there was a week of AI conference that actually took place the week of May 13th-ish. And Amanda Fox, who was leading and organizing this, they had
Oh,
organized the
wow.
Suno competition, and I had the opportunity to listen to a bunch of the songs on there.
Hmm.
Whoa, they're pretty cool. I mean, again, compared to maybe some of the unique songs that some really talented artists can make right now, yeah, I mean, I would still prefer those, but not that much of a drop off, not as much as people think. I mean, some of them are pretty great, especially when folks really are thoughtful about how they put all those things together. So yeah, I
Yeah,
think
and
Suno is
as
a
a
very interesting
musician,
tool.
it's threatening. I'm like, wow, I know how much skill it takes to not only write lyrics that are good and universal and catchy, but then to perform them and then to produce the instrumentation, and then even to mix and produce that. Like, that is a huge level of skill, but it also is a barrier and a reason why a lot of people don't try that. And so now we have removed part of that barrier and anyone can create a song. And so that is both threatening, but also exciting because it's lowering the barrier of the skill level needed for creation. So that's just another interesting thing that's been rattling around in my brain when it comes to AI.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think this idea of content creation obviously is going to pop up across multiple different mediums. I mean, you mentioned the music piece; it's also now around images and it's around video as well. And I had the opportunity to talk with Dr. James Hudson a little bit about that as well, who has deep experiences in AI as well as artistry, because he's actually doing like virtual artistry programs. And he had a very interesting perspective, which is this isn't the
Yeah.
first time that's happened
Mhm.
to the field, right? That there have been disruptions before. Think of even how a lot of times music companies and musicians were selling right their music on albums and CDs, and then something like Napster on these things come along, and that completely disrupted that industry. And there's been evolution since then. So there have been innovations, maybe not to the extent of what this could be. I don't know that I'm even equipped to be the person to like right size some of those events, but it I can't help but also think that like folks who have the expertise there are still gonna have an advantage in using, like, those tools as well, right? Because I think as an example of, like, the one of the first, like, really amazing AI generated songs that I heard, which was this song, I think it was by, like, Drake in the Future, AI Drake, which was called "Heart on My Sleeve." My understanding from the person who created that, which was, I think, somebody who was on TikTok or something under the, like, tag ghostwriter, is that that individual has a music background, and some of the voices and things they were actually, like, producing and had musical. I think that's very different from somebody who may just go into Suno and just is typing a prompt,
Mhm.
and you can tell in the quality. Like, if you listen to "Heart on My Sleeve" and you listen to, say, like, a Suno generated song, I think both of them are still pretty good, but there's a noticeable difference in Heart on My Sleeve in terms of like the musicianship and those pieces there. Grant, albeit, I mean, again, even Heart on My Sleeve, I'm sure is there's a drop off there between actually seeing those artists perform live. But all that to say, I think that the subject matter expertise is still going to play a role across some of these mediums because you're going to know the verbiage, you're going to know how these pieces go together in a way that somebody who doesn't have a trained eye has it. So I am curious to see how once the industry stabilizes a little bit and the artists start to become more familiar with the AI tools as well, like how does that then change their ways of working, right? I know even as an example on the video side, it came out that when Sora was announced and everybody saw that demo that dropped, which did
Yeah.
sorry, did you see that demo
Yeah.
as well with the videos when it came out? Okay. It was announced, I mean, probably within that same week that Tyler Perry had canceled plans on like his $900 million studio that he was building because he saw that demo. And so some folks are like, well, Sora in of itself isn't as good as that. Maybe that's probably true, right? I wouldn't know. I don't have a trained eye. But if somebody is well known in the industry as Tyler Perry's doing that, it makes me think that he saw something and he's wanting to modify
Mhm.
his strategic plan based off of what that showed him. So that's
Yeah.
kind of where I land on it as well. One thing I'd love to hold space for is I know that throughout this episode, you've dropped some amazing gems to our colleagues in the field here who are trying to grapple with artificial intelligence. I want to just hold a little bit of space now Is there any advice that you would offer as you continue to be on this learning journey as somebody who has been personally a user of AI, but also teaching others about AI? Any advice that you feel like you haven't been able to share that
I
you would
think I've
offer?
talked a lot about the specific things when it comes to delivering PD and how leaders I think need to provide space and time for teachers to explore and reflect on these things. But I would just say don't be afraid of the skeptics. Like if you're going into a PD session and you're going to present on AI, it's real easy to be like, I wonder if anyone's going to be skeptical and call me out. Instead, hold space for that and honor that skepticism because that's an important perspective is so important and it's important to address many different perspectives in the approach and that's not putting that out there and putting out the harmful ways that AI can be used is not going to I in my experience it's not going to decrease buy-in, it will actually increase buy-in because they see you're being honest and you're not just ignoring the bad stuff. So, I would encourage people to look at that and then don't focus on 20 different tools. Especially don't focus on one tool unless that's something very specific your district's going for, but I would say take an approach where you're looking at strategies and you're looking at how can AI be used in ways that can transform education, help students, and in the process also save teachers time. But I don't think that should be the main focus. Don't just talk about how it can be used as a shortcut. Talk about how it can be used to elevate and enhance.
Well said, Carly. If folks are interested in connecting with you, how would you
I'm at
invite them
Coach
to
Karle all
connect with
over the
you?
place. So I'm all over TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Threads. I don't really get on Threads as much anymore, but I'm there. So I encourage people to check me out on any social media platform that you're at. And I also have a link tree. So it's tr.ee/Coach Karle. And so I've got my email and all the information there. And I do provide professional learning opportunities both virtually and in person. And I really encourage people if you don't have an expert at your district, reach out to someone like yourself, right? Or someone like me, or someone who is an expert who can help lead and guide your district towards more information and more knowledge on AI. And I just do not think that burying our head in the sand and the ostrich effect of this is scary, so I'm just not going to pay attention to it. Avoiding AI is not going to stop it, right? It's advancing and it's advancing rapidly. And so it's if educators are part of the conversation, I think that's going to be really beneficial for our students. If we just ignore it, I don't think that's the right approach because it's here whether we like it or not. So I just encourage people to if there's no expert in your district, try to find someone who can start the conversation. And there probably is someone, there probably is a teacher in your district who is exploring it on their own. And so look for those folks as well.